Welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating, from the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day. Each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. Yet another exciting show. In the first hour, we're going to be talking about the supernatural world of the Iroquois Indians. And for a total change of pace, in the second hour, we're going to be talking about the cattle mutilation enigma. You know, sometimes they just schedule that way, but I don't know. There might be some relationship. It could happen. I don't know. Before we bring our first guest on, Michael Bastine, a few announcements. Just Energy Radio is brought to you by SoulHealer.com and the Institute of Applied Energetics, AppliedEnergeticsInstitute.com, where you can learn to become a medical intuitive counselor, or energy medicine practitioner, all from the comfort of your own home. And then next week is the ASPE Paranormal Symposium in Taos, New Mexico. Actually, I think it starts on the 23rd. I'll be there over the weekend, so I think it's the 25th. I don't know. I don't have my calendar in front of me. Oh, the 25th through 30th. That's when I'll be there. More information can be found at aspesymposium.com. That's aspesymposium.com. And don't forget, if you're in the Texas area, you can't miss the History, Haunt, and Legends Conference held in spooky Jefferson, Texas, the most haunted city in Texas. Lectures all morning, ghost hunting all night. It's always a lot of fun. You should go. If you haven't gone, you should go because it's fun. Anyway, so let me tell you a little bit about Michael, and we'll get him on the air. Assembling the law and beliefs of this guarded spiritual legacy, Michael Bastine shares the stories of both historic and contemporary encounters with beings and places of Iroquois legend. Grounding their tales with the history of the people of the Longhouse, the author shows how the supernatural beings, places, and customs of the Iroquois live on in contemporary paranormal experience. Michael Bastine is an Algonquin healer, elder, and former student of the famous Tuscarora medicine man, Wallace Mad Bear Anderson, and Tuscarora healer Ted Williams. So the author of Iroquois Supernatural, please welcome Michael Bastine. Hey, Michael, how are you?
I'm doing well, and how about you, Dr. Rita?
I am great, and thank you so much for coming on the show. I think this is just going to be really interesting because you kind of cover a lot of different areas. You cover mythology, you cover kind of the Native American area, as well as ghosts, as you maybe, got a little insight into one of the things that floats my boat. And so you kind of cover all my bases. It's great.
Yeah, it's that time of the year also when those types of thoughts tend to surface and people get a little bit more involved or look at that part of life which sometimes they try to make entertaining. I think it is entertaining, but it also has some serious and some meaningful experiences that we need to relate to. So when we can share these things with other folks that have interest, that's our job.
Exactly. And when you talk about Native American history, I mean, not what the white people did, but but their actual history and legends and myths and healing, and I mean, there's all of this stuff that we, and I'm just going to say as white people, don't really know a whole lot about, and I think that's something that your book helps bring forward is some of that tradition that we're really not aware of.
Yes, what I've been able to do was actually, I guess what I viewed myself as kind of just a helper to these guys. So I hung out and split wood and did dishes, but just hanging around with this group of people, you start to see their network. You see their circles that they travel in. You meet the people who are a part of this network, which never seems to get public. And when they did get public, this takes me back to the late 70s when I first was introduced to this, because I was raised in a typical small rural community, went to public school. Most people think that if you're Native and then you must have been raised on the res and you've had all these influences that were there since birth. And I actually had this opportunity to learn one way and then learn another way and then question why wasn't I being exposed to these other elements that are a part of this life. And that's what was really intriguing when I saw them, the practitioners, when I saw Mad Bear and Ted Williams really start to apply these teachings, and I saw the results. And these people, they really didn't show any signs of anger, but they used their insights to take on these situations that life presents to us. And instead of turning it, and people hold on to the negative energies, they actually exploit that and go beyond that response, and they start to interact with these things, and they actually let me observe things so I could see how this can really be something of benefit to all of us. So experiencing that type of approach led me further into the culture, which the stories, the legends, the things that are the basis that hold on to these teachings, they're not clearly spelled out. It's kind of an abstract system that they use, and you really need to observe it for decades and then see how they apply that in life. And as that developed, I started to really have those insights, and they don't just pop in overnight. It just takes your time and not pursue it too hard, but not give up on it. And it really has developed into a really great experience in this life.
That is very cool. Very cool. I have to tell you, I grew up in New York, and I remember, well, there was this one book that had those wooden mask things in them. All right, and this is kind of an embarrassing story, but I'll share it with the listeners and you. And so the picture really scared me, and my brother and sister used to, chase me around the house with the picture, and then they would hide it under my pillow in the bedroom. They were mean. But those were Iroquois. I remember they were Iroquois, but they were, like these spooky kind of faces with long hair. And since we're talking about the Iroquois, what did those masks represent? What were they used for?
Well, what I can tell you is that as we discuss, as we're using certain terminology to refer to the masks, and using the word masks is typically what is spoken about in public. in the book, there is a section that talks about false faces. Many people may think it's the same thing, but it really isn't. The masks that are produced or made by the Iroquois, when they call them a mask, it's more of an artifact that would just be on display or for sale to the public. But when you refer to the false faces, what I can describe to you and what your family did to you by chasing you with those images is actually, I'm thinking is actually part of what triggered insights for you back during that time, because these are powerful images. And when we refer to them as false faces, they actually become living entities, living beings. And they're connected to so many other elements in nature. But when the false faces be referred to in that manner, there's not a lot of discussion in public. And one of the reasons for that is they are what they call, some people refer to them as secret societies. They're really not secret. They're known. There's not a lot of people who get to go beyond and see the inner workings of it. But I can tell you that the difference between a mask and the false faces are used in ceremony. And they actually are the participant in a ceremony, and they actually feed them once a year. These ceremonies are held in the middle of winter. In fact, that's what they're called. They're called midwinter ceremonies. And they honor these masks because of the work that they do throughout the year. So when people kind of just see from the outside, they're not actually seeing what goes on behind those scenes. There are so many events tied to the false faces, and that's where, when people get curious and they want to know, well, what types of events, I have to kind of draw the line there, because this is an area which is held to be so sacred that they say to honor the sacredness, we don't want to bring these types of activities out into the public, because the public has a tendency to, yeah, right, that really happened, and because they've not been exposed to these elements of life which are real and there are practitioners of, and we actually need these people because they are doing work far beyond what the superficial, what it looks like they're doing. They are actually maintaining these energies in different places. So their work is crucial, and it is not really supported by a lot of people, but the few that are hanging on to this are maintaining it very well.
I mean, it's a really interesting concept, and I'm just trying to see if I'm kind of wrapping my head around it. Does an individual wear the false face, and when they're wearing the false face, and please forgive me for stating it this way, are they bringing the energy in of this being so that they can work in relationship with the being to do whatever it is they're doing, or does that make sense? I think that makes sense.
Yes, it's a partnership. So the people who actually are the caregivers to these, they can wear it. I don't want to go into too much of the detail, but I can tell you one experience that I did have that was directly related to the false faces. Now, Mad Bear would have many visitors over the time that I would hang around with him, and there was a man that came in, and he started to just stare at his mask on the wall. And Mad Bear let it go for a little while, and then he says, excuse me, he says, is there something that you want to say? He said, why are you staring at the mask? And the man said, he goes, well, I've heard a lot of stories, and he said, I'm a reporter, and he said, I just wanted to come up and ask some questions and see if we could get some information about these masks. So Mad Bear, knowing that he was a reporter, then said, I would ask you to not stare at the mask. He said, they're living. He said, it's a living entity. He said, if you walked into a room and you saw a person who was not a typical looking person, but you started to stare, he said, it becomes disrespectful. So the man kind of agreed with that. And Mad Bear started to tell him some experiences and stories behind this mask. And he just kind of laughed a little, and he said, yeah, right. And one of the things that Mad Bear mentioned to him, he said, the mask is actually a living entity. He said, the hair on this mask grows. And the reporter laughed again, and Mad Bear told him, he said, I'll tell you what. He said, let's go over there. You'll see the mask is mounted on the wall. He said, we will measure the length of hair. We'll measure the distance from the top of the mask to the ceiling. He said, you come back in a year. And he says, and you measure this hair again. And the man came back after a year, and he measured the hair, and it was longer. And it was considerably longer. So that kind of freaked this guy out. But as I was able to observe these types of things, it was just, Mad Bear, it was commonplace. Actually, we've had referral to these types of experiences as what they call paranormal. And I said, in the Iroquois teachings and their traditions, this is normal. So what we would like to do is share the things that people, and they call it paranormal because they're not familiar. They really don't understand, or they don't want to understand, or maybe there's just some fear that has been instilled over some part of their life, and they don't want to venture into areas that they think they've been told that's either satanic or it's devil worship or some nonsense, without exploring and researching and finding out, wow, that these are actually things that are beneficial to all of this life. And it doesn't mean that just because you're non-native that you can't participate with these types of activities. They won't allow most non-native people into the inner circles, but the people who are familiar and are interested and respectful, I guess that's too much for a lot of people, so they can't get to those points. And it also requires just a great deal of patience. You almost have to be born patient. And when you see how these things unfold and how they develop and how they integrate into this life, it's like you go, how come we can't convey this information to this other group of people and have them see what we're experiencing and the reasons why? And I think we would really improve all levels of life if we were able to do that. I'm just hoping with the book that we can get some outside of the typical norm of what people may have written about the standard cultural aspects. But we do have things in there that are not typically, I've never seen them written about anywhere else. In fact, one of the other legends in there is the stone giants. And actually,
yeah, I was going to come to that because I had some definite questions.
Well, let's go.
We'll come back to that. I have one more question about the false faces. Did the faces, when you talk about like the Kachinas, and I'm just, kind of pulling it out there, they typically represented gods. When you talk about these false faces, were they gods? Were they spirits? Were they ancestors that came back through the mask? I mean, any idea of who these people were, these beings were?
Yes, I have my own interpretation and my own thoughts on it. And we don't just do a light contemplation on it. It's actually an offering is made with sacred tobacco. You don't usually get an immediate response. It takes a little while, but the things that you have just mentioned, you've actually nailed it, because gods, in what I am now currently understanding, if I was an attorney and I wanted to prove a point using the Bible, there is actually one of the commandments that says, "Thou shalt not have false gods before thee." Well, how would humans that have been so detached from their teachings for so many generations know how to connect with these gods? And how would they know if they actually connected with the good gods? And this is where the fear comes in. And when we reference that element of what people refer to as God, we don't use that word. We use creator, we use great spirit, or great mystery. And by using references like that, we know there is no confusion who you are directing your attention to. But by that commandment alone proves, I think it substantiates the case that there are more than one God. And by understanding this, we need to exercise caution when we are accessing the gods. And the gods are there, some are for our benefit, and some are there for their benefit. And if they can take advantage of a human or many humans, I wouldn't put it past them. So that's why there's a lot of caution exercised about giving out too much information. And actually, this ties into the story, actually, of the stone giants. And if that answered your question, okay, then we can move on, because the one mask that this reporter happened to be staring at is called it's called the hot dewy. I don't see. I was just checking to see if I should say the word out in public, but it has been mentioned before. So they refer to that mask as the hot dewy, and that started as a legend way back before humans were on the planet. And as the life developed with these stone giants, I think you could probably refer to them by human standards as gods, because they had these supernatural powers. And this one stone giant started to go beyond what was typically allowed for them to exercise their power. He actually started developing so much power, he thought that he could challenge the Creator. And he reached a point in his life when he said he was going to ask the Creator to come and witness how he could utilize this power. So that he called the Creator down. The Creator stood there and he said, "Watch this." So he said, "I want you to cover your eyes and turn your back." And the Creator covered his eyes and turned his back, and this stone giant began to do his chants, and he conjured up this energy, and the wind picked up. It was thundering. It was thunder, lightning was striking all around them. The wind picked up like they had never witnessed before. And this took a few minutes, and things calmed down, and he told the Creator, he said, "Take a look." So the Creator looks around, and all the trees have been laid down flat. And the Creator says, "Wow," he says, "that's pretty impressive." And the stone giant says, "That's nothing." He says, "Do you see that mountain over there on the horizon?" And the Creator said, "Yeah." He says, you close your eyes and turn your back again. So now the stone giant's really conjuring up this energy, and it took a little bit longer, and the wind picked up, and the lightning and the thunder, and this time the ground began to shake. And it took a little bit longer, but then when it calmed down, he asked the Creator, he says, take a look. And the Creator turned around and looked, and that mountain had moved. Not real far, but it had moved. And the Creator said, that's very impressive. He said, it's my turn. And so he asked the stone giant to cover his eyes and turn his back. And the stone giant had just barely covered his eyes and turned his back. And the Creator said, okay. He says, now you take a look. And the stone giant went to go and turn, and the mountain had been moved right next to him. And he bumped into it with his nose. And it twisted his nose to the side. That's the image of the hot dewy, of that mask. And the Creator told the stone giant, he said, because you have gone beyond and utilized this in a way that's not respectful, he says, I'm going to remove all the stone giants from the planet. And the stone giant thought for a moment, and he says, you're right. He says, let me make an agreement with you. He said, if we change our ways, and we will never abuse these powers, but we will use these powers to observe and to protect certain places on the earth and prepare the earth for the humans that are coming. Would you allow us to stay? And the Creator said, you made the deal. He says, now you need to keep it. And he allowed the stone giants to stay. And this is the remnant of what they are calling today of Bigfoot. But the mask has the twisted nose off to the side to represent that this came from a period of time before the humans. And it was there to help us understand that as we develop through life, we develop power and we develop insight. But it doesn't want us to abuse that. It wants us to learn from it, to share it, but to always respect these things. So those are the kinds of stories that actually maintain and keep this culture alive. And it's entertaining, and it holds a value. It holds this element that we don't always find in some of the other mythical stories that are out there. Some do, but not always.
So did the stone giants keep their promise to provide healing, or did they end up slipping up eventually?
No, they actually did. That's and Mad Bear used to say, he goes, this is why we can observe and hear stories of the stone giants, well, they call them Sasquatch or Bigfoot. They said the Bigfoot are the distant relative of these beings that were here at an earlier time. He said they're not quite as powerful as the ones that were first here, but he said they are still very powerful beings. And he said, and they don't interfere or disrupt or disturb the humans. And actually, if anything, they help the humans not destroy certain parts of the land and where the certain trees are and where certain places that are still considered sacred. They are upholding their end of the deal by just observing and not interfering, but preventing any disturbance to those sacred places.
That's good. Similar to the stone giants, one of the things that I was reading in your book was that there are actually legends of, I'm going to say, wee people in the United States.
Yep.
What's with that?
Well, they're referred to by many in many different ways. The native people in this area like to call them little people. Little people, and here's another interesting experience I had. Mad Bear actually had a little human skull of the little people. I can describe it for you. It was about the size of an appliance bulb, the one that's in your refrigerator or dryer. It had the full set of teeth. It had everything was in its proper scale. It was such an incredible sight that he said, "You've never seen anything like that, have you?" And I said, "Well, of course not."
No.
And he said, "I don't normally bring this out, but," he says, "you seem to be of a very calm nature." He says, "You don't get excited." He says, "I know you won't talk about this in other places." So it was one of those things that just was an incredible experience that I guess if someone just told me about it, I would probably say, "Yeah, right," and say, it's just one of those urban legends. But when he did show that, he said, "We do use this in ceremony." And he said, the little people, he said, are these segment of life. I guess this is where it gets really difficult for most of the mainstream to accept, but there are life forms which exist all around us, which they don't even see. And the reason they don't see it is a lot of the humans in the time that we're in now have chosen a certain path. They've made up their mind through the influences that have been told or instructed in them through their religion, through the education system, through politics, that these things aren't real. And if they were real, we want to see these things brought out in the open. We want to actually see a demonstration. And see, by the native traditions, they understand that these things not only exist, but they are not to be used for entertainment in the sense of, here we're going to have the little people show, and here they're going to come out and demonstrate some of their practices. That, again, is going beyond the point of, like I described with the false faces. The little people, they do have ceremony with them and for them. And actually, since the book has come out, I've received a number of letters from people around the country that are asking for help because they were allowed to attend like a Sundance or some other gathering, and they've had an experience with little people, and they don't know, that they're not sure how to categorize this because there's no reference point and there's been nothing in their past part of their life here that they can access that says, oh, I know what those are. I was traveling through the Ozarks in the late 70s with Mad Bear. It was about 2 or 3 in the morning, and he was dozing off, but he asked me, he says, where are we? I said, somewhere in the Ozarks. He said, all right. He said, the next light you see, let's pull over, let's get a good night's rest. I said, okay. So the next motel I see, we pull in, get in the car, unpacked, and Mad Bear runs into the bathroom to get ready, and I hear a sound outside the door. I'm getting things kind of set up in the room, and I hear this sound like a high-pitched voice, but it's almost like childlike sounding. The best I can try to imitate that, it was a real high little, just tiny little voice and all. and I heard that, and I was listening by the door, and I was thinking, what the heck is that? And I heard it again. So I knocked on the bathroom door. I said, Mad Bear, I said, I don't know what's going on, but there's some strange noises out here. He came out. He stood by the door. He heard that same sound. He looks at me with a real excited look. He goes, hey, that's little people. And I said, yeah. He said, they love it when you give them food. He said, go out to the car. He said, get that leftover chicken dinner we had. He said, lay out a napkin under the tree that's out there. And he said, and place the food on it. And initially when he said that, I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, why me? But then I said, you know what? He's never steered me wrong. He's never guided me into anything that would cause any problems. So I went out and I grabbed the food and I laid it out, came back in, and we hear that sound again. He said, give them a few minutes. He says, they're really grateful when you can give them a little bit of food. And I waited, and then it got quiet again, and he said, yeah, he says, it's probably about time. He says, go on out and check that napkin. So I go out, and sure enough, the napkin is there. None of the food is on it. And I just bring the napkin in, and he said, it helps appease them, too. He said, they can be sometimes naughty. He says, they can be tricky. He said, they're not always trusted, but he said, we need to work on that. He said, that's part of our job, is to work with these things. And I've had people question, they say, are they dimensional? And I don't believe so. I believe that they are in our dimension, but they vibrate at such a frequency that in order for us to see them, they have to either really lower their vibration so much, or we have to be in one of those very insightful moments in life when we have an opportunity to experience that. So the little people, and they're not just here, they are around the world. I mean, when you hear the stories that come out of the ancient part of Europe, when they start saying they have these fairies, and they talk about the leprechauns, and they talk about these beings that live out in the forest, and they refer to them as gnomes. And I'm going, you know what? I think everybody knows that they're here. It's just they're not sure why or how we should interact with them. But there are stories of great healing. They have stories of assisting people through really extremely difficult moments in life. In fact, I think there's one book that I've heard of. I don't believe I've ever seen it, but people say it was compiled from the Cherokee, and someone did write a book just exclusive about little people's stories. But our book is trying to give as many aspects, so many different points that are utilized within the culture, and can they be frightening? Yeah, I think they can be. If we're not able to put it in the perspective that says, if this element is here, how can we use it to help ourselves? How can we share? And I would caution anybody who's interested in this area of life, if they want to become a practitioner, not to do it alone, and to have people like Ted Williams and Mad Bear. These were people who really understood that we shouldn't do some of these activities on our own. In fact, what kind of leads me into another part of the story in the book is the witches. And Mad Bear, he, without letting people know exactly what he was up to, he would ask people if they wanted to participate in a ceremony. And you'd say, well, what kind of ceremony? He says, well, we're looking for some people who are creating some disturbances. And he said, we want to find out who they're connected to. And when he would say who, you would think he was talking about other people, but he was actually talking about energies. And witchcraft is actually, it's an energy. And what he had done was he asked a few of us to stay overnight. And he kind of instructed us. He says, if you want to participate, he said, we have to stay in and close all the windows and cover the windows. We have to lock the doors. He said, if you hear a knock or a voice at the door, and he says, you recognize it, he said, you're not to answer the door. He said, we're going to take this medicine, and he prepared a pot of medicine, and it was tea. And I saw some of the things that were in there, and someone asked me years later, they said, what was in that pot? And when I described it, they told me, they said, that's that stuff that grows along the side of the road. They said they call that red whip. And Ted told me, he says, that's used for witchcraft. And I said, well, we all drank it. And I says, we're still here today. And he said, well, he goes, I wonder why he was doing that. And as I put it all together years and years later, what I realized was that this was in the late 70s, and they were having a lot of disruptive behavior, people kind of interfering with the traditional people coming back out into the open. The government is really paranoid. They were then. Well, they still are. But back then, the biggest focus was how to stop this tradition of the native people coming back out in the open. And Mad Bear was asked to work on that by the elders. So what he was doing was he was actually calling in this energy, this witchcraft energy, but he was wanting to know who was connected to it on this side. And what was interesting is it woke us up during the night. We heard sounds that I can't even begin to describe to you. Not screeches, but just noises that I said, this is not the kind of thing I was expecting. But it sounded even like someone walking across his roof. And in the morning, Mad Bear opens up, takes the curtains and the covers off the windows, and he says, did you guys hear anything? And I said, yeah. I said, it was a pretty active night. He said, yeah, it was. He says, I think we found out who the perpetrators of this disruption is. And what I've been able to piece together from that time was that Mad Bear used this witchcraft medicine to actually call them in. He wanted them to come in close, but he knew to do it on his own as an individual is very dangerous. But if you have other people who are of a good mind and a good heart, you can actually tie the collectiveness. You can keep them as supporters in what you're trying to do. So he didn't have to put himself at risk. He could use us without telling us too much, but he could use us in the collective manner to say, I need the energy of the good humans that are here. I just don't know if they're willing to participate if I tell them that way. So he used us to do this, to draw this energy in close. And when we were on our next trip out west, he stopped over and he told the elders that had asked him to look into this. He gave them the name of this person. He said he didn't know the name of the person, but he said when he heard the voice, as soon as they had conversation, and it was a woman that was in this group, she worked for the United Nations, or claimed that was her job, but when he heard the voice, he said, that's the one, the perpetrator. And he let the other people know. He said, this is the one to be cautious around. She's the one that is gathering information and becoming disruptive to the native traditional elders. So when I start to piece together all of these experiences, and it's just taken decades to do it, but it starts to show me that if we participate and we are patient and we even ask, and here's where a lot of people, they get instruction or they hear from someone to just ask for whatever you need and you will get it. Well, that's true, but you need to put a little disclaimer on that asking. And I said, I've just discovered this, I'm going to say in the last 5 to 10 years. The disclaimer is, when you're asking for information, that you include when I'm ready. Because most of us, we think we go through this life thinking we're ready. And ready for what? I'm not really quite sure. But most people think that they're accomplished, they're achieved, they're at some level in life, and they think they're ready. But I said, as life will have it, you can ask for some insight or for some information. You could walk out your door a couple minutes later. That information could cross your path, and you won't recognize it. And you'll say, gee, I've had people come back to me and say, gee, I asked for this, and they said, I'm still waiting. That was 2 years ago. And I said, did you put that little disclaimer in there? I said, because it could have crossed your path minutes after you walked out of your house. And I said, and unfortunately, you weren't ready. But you see, we need to always put ourselves in this position of humbling ourselves and saying, when I'm ready, I need some info. And you can ask for the specifics. And I said, you know what? I've always had it come to me. I said, it never has failed me. So I said, maybe I'm not asking for too much. Maybe I need to ask for more. But I said, I think I'm getting what I need. I said, and I'm very respectful of that, and I'm very cautious about not to overdo it.
I want to kind of change topic here, and because in your bio thing, I mean, we're talking about the book, but I want to talk about you for a second because you work as a healer, and I was wondering if you could kind of share with what all do you do?
Well, I'm very cautious about going into that area, and mostly because there's areas in which because I don't live on a reservation, someone could start saying, oh, I went to see Mike and I had this problem. It was a medical condition. It cleared right up. And they did this to Mad Bear, but they couldn't make anything stick because he was on the reservation. They tried to charge him practicing medicine without a license. And I learned from that I need to be very cautious. Sometimes, and I'm going to venture out a little bit here and say, I think that your program is actually a form of healing. So by using this and having conversation like this and having you kind of oversee that, it is a form of medicine. It is a form of healing. So when people can get energized and when they can get inspired to act, it gives me that inner knowing that this is actually a form of healing. And when we can convey this information to someone else, I've had people ask me, they go, how can we repay you? How can we give you something in return? I said, you know how to repay me? Get better. That's it. It's that simple. So as far as healing, I don't usually go too much into that because it is an area in which I kind of protect that like they do the false faces and the little people. Mm-hmm. Because if we're using things that are very hard to detect scientifically, then it becomes one of those areas where people have their doubts, but they also get a little bit suspicious. And so, but I can relate a couple of stories of. I'll give you one.
And let me just share one thing with you. I mean, this is a very enlightened, open audience. Trust me, they have to hang out with me all the time. And they're very well educated in, and I like to say, alternative thought topics. And so I don't think anything you're saying surprises or shocks any of them.
And you're right. Because there's a growing shift in the people's understanding, and it's influenced by these other elements, which they're cyclical in nature, and we are, and it actually does tie into, the book doesn't mention anything about it, but it does tie into the 2012 element, and the timing on the book, I think, is perfect for us And I don't make a direct connection because I want people to kind of see that on their own as they're reading the book, that these are areas of trying to raise our consciousness. And the reason why we're trying to help people do that is the whole 2012 event is based on the Earth and the cosmos pretty much saying to the humans, you guys are intentionally holding yourselves back, and it's time for you to go through another change, another world change, where the leap occurs for humanity. And when this leap occurs, whoever comes out on the other side of that transition point, they become much higher functioning conscious beings. And we're the only ones that will get this major improvement from this. The other life forms will also get an improvement. They'll go through the leap. But as geologically, it shows us that historically there are life forms that just cease to exist. They don't, from one point, they just become fossils, and people feel a little bad. They go, geez, how come that life got left behind? Well, it couldn't function, it couldn't vibrate, it couldn't resonate and harmonize in the next world change. So will we see plants and animals and other life forms get left behind? Yeah, because it's part of the evolution of life. And when I bring up the evolution, it's not following the Darwin thing to that point. He was looking at animals and plants, and he was trying to apply that to the human. And we're different. We're very different than the other forms in creation. So that's part of what this book also relates to, is that the human is a very sacred and a very special life form that this creation provides for and that we need to stay connected to. And if we can stay connected, that's where these insights keep coming from. And they're continuous. And what I give to people, I say, you know what? Don't take it to the level that I did. Go beyond. Take it further than I can. Because I'm starting to get on the downside of the hill. I said, I'm not old by any means, but I said, certainly don't have the same drive and energy that I had 30 years ago either. So I always just let them know, you can take things to another level. Just do it respectfully. And not only respectfully, but humble yourself. I said, that's when this energy wants to get close to you, is when you humble yourself and you behave in a manner in which it welcomes this energy in. So this actually kind of ties into the healer element that has been said. You know, when I had discussions with Mad Bear, he was noted and referred to as a medicine man. And he told me one time, he said, I can't take that title. And I said, Mad Bear, why not? The things that I've seen you do, I said, heck, that more than qualifies you to be a medicine man. He said, we're not allowed to take that title until we're well into our 70s or 80s. He said, we just don't know enough. And he said, we think we do, but he said, we don't know enough. And those words stuck with me, that people can refer to us as healers or shamans or medicine people, but he's right. And I really see that and understand that we really aren't capable or entitled yet to take a title like that. Just because you've had a few success stories, it doesn't give you the title. You have to keep maintaining that position in life in order to really enforce, and maybe someday, if I do stay on the planet long enough, maybe someday I can take that title. But at this stage of life, I'm still trying to learn as much as I can and share as much as I can, and I think that's part of the book, is to try to entertain and give insight and let people know that there is so much more to not just the Iroquois, but all of the Native people. They all have their own stories. They all have their own insights. And I think if you just are patient and you hang around with that area and those people enough, they'll start to open up and you'll start to find out. You may even walk past them. They just look like average people on the street. And they're not out to impress anybody or make any kind of a big scene, but they may hold a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of insights that can just help so many people. So those are little bit things about me that this is what motivates me to keep going and assisting other folks that are having some difficulties in life.
Well, and there's just so much tradition, to fall back on. I mean, I have been a student of Kabbalah, and I've been studying it on and off for too many years. I'll just say that. And I feel like I have just barely scratched the surface, and I would think with, Iroquois tradition or any of the other traditions that, you might be involved with it for years and years and years, but in the end, you still realize you've only really just scratched the surface.
Yep. I have one more little point I'd like to make, which is...
Okay, well, we have 3 minutes.
Okay. I don't want to demean any culture or any following of traditions, and the Iroquois know that. But what I've been telling people lately is we need to go beyond the culture. We need to go beyond the traditions. And when we do that, we start to find out there's an underlying connected parallel to all of the humans. And I said, because it transcends race, gender, culture, language, it goes beyond. And I said, that's what the Iroquois culture has actually helped me with, is going beyond the point of what we would refer to as, that's part of their culture, it's part of their traditions. And that's why I'm going, wow, it's such an opportunity. The culture can lead us. The culture can guide us. It can give us some tools. I said it basically is something that occupies the time of day. But during the occupation of the time of day, we should be allowing our minds to go beyond, to see what this can lead us into. So even though they have a great culture and great traditions, I still bring that little reminder up and say, let's take it beyond. Let's go to the next level with this. Let's see what happens. I think there's something really great here. And if we can do that, I'm willing to participate and assist with it.
That's a great point. That's a great point.
Yeah.
Your book, Iroquois Supernatural, I'll read the whole thing. Iroquois Supernatural, Talking Animals and Medicine People. Where is it available?
It's available at Barnes & Noble. It's available on Amazon. It's published by Inner Traditions and Bear & Company. You can get them up on the web and Internet, and you can order through them. It's actually available in all of the stores now. Any bookstore you go to, they may not have it on the shelf, but they can get it for you. And it really is a wealth of information, and it will, if you allow it, to open some doors for you.
Excellent. Michael, you're a gem. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your insights and wisdom.
Well, thank you, Dr. Rita. It's been an honor to be with you and to talk with your audience, and I'm looking forward to more response from people out there, and they can make contact through Inner Traditions if they'd like, if there's people.
Okay, if they wanted to get a hold of you or something like that.
Yep. And they know that Inner Traditions passes that information along. So thank you again.
Well, thank you, and hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Bye, Michael.
Bye-bye.
and that's Michael Bastine, his book, Iroquois Supernatural, Talking Animals and Medicine People, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.